Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Ryan Sargent. I'm with Make Music, and today we're going to talk about building better assessments, specifically formative assessments. And we're going to talk about how you can use SmartMusic to build assessments that help your students, help save you time, and get stuff done. A little bit about me right off the bat here. I am, for a little bit longer, the social media manager here at Make Music. I'm very happy to be joining the education team. Could read you my fancy bio, but the long and short of it is I'm a trombone player. I've been a band kid my whole life. I got started in a big Texas marching program, did BOAs, the whole deal. And then after college, I moved to Colorado for grad school and ended up becoming a middle school band director in a program that didn't necessarily have the resources of the program that I grew up in. And so being able to kind of see things from both perspectives was a real eye-opener. And now, especially that I've come into the music industry with Make Music, seeing things from all perspectives has become, it's really given me a new outlook on music education as a whole. I also am an adjunct professor. I teach music history in Denver as well, and I'm on the board of the Technology Institute for Music Educators. So I'm very passionate about technology, learning how technology can benefit and help teachers save time and make teachers as effective as possible. Like I said, I'm joining the Make Music education team, and we're incredibly passionate about what we do here at Make Music. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to join the education team in particular is that we have some really cool ways that we interact with you guys as educators. And one of those is to gather your feedback and kind of be your voice with the company, and be the company's voice to you. We have a lot of fun making sure that line of communication stays open. And I think that's one of the things that I look forward to most about my job. Other things we do, we build content to support music teachers. That includes training content that helps show you how to use SmartMusic as effectively as possible. We deliver that content online, in person, with videos on YouTube, and at MEA conventions. So it's very likely that somebody from the Make Music education team will be visiting your state at some point in the coming school year to chat, and hopefully give you guys great information like what we're about to do in this webinar. Some housekeeping as we get started. You'll notice that I am not Giovanna Cruz. Hopefully we all figured that one out by now. This is Giovanna. And she was gracious enough to help me host this webinar. The best way to get in touch with me or anybody else in the webinar is to use the chat function. The chat function is up here in the upper right once you're on the Quick Start tab of the webinar. If you need to activate a chat window from an iPad, this is how to do it. Just so that everybody knows how to get a hold of me. And that includes any questions. We'll answer questions at the end. We've got time set aside for that, and we'll go over all the questions then. So if you've got any questions, shoot me a chat message, and we will make sure to get to those. Okay, on to the good stuff. What is formative assessment? It's something that's been studied for a long time. Bloom and other researchers have been working on this for almost 50 years now. So formative assessment isn't new, but it's something that I think has taken a much bigger role in the classroom, and especially in the music classroom in recent years. And a lot of that goes back to this study in 2009. And these guys defined formative assessments as, and bear with me on the sentence, practice in a classroom is formative to the extent that evidence about student achievement is elicited, interpreted, and used by teachers, learners, or their peers to make decisions about the next steps in instruction that are likely to be better or better founded than the decisions they would have taken in the absence of the evidence that was elicited. That sentence makes no sense to me. It's almost incomprehensible. He managed to get the word elicited in there a couple times, so that's impressive. But as a teacher, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this. This is a whole big can of worms, and I feel like this happens a lot, right? Especially in professional development sessions. We hear this great education buzzword, and then it turns our brains to mush, right? We don't have a way to go about implementing this in our next rehearsal, right? How on earth are we supposed to put this sentence to use when it's time to sit down and learn how to play Frank Kelly? There's just, it's so far removed from what we do as music teachers. Luckily, we can put this into plain English. And in actual words that humans use, I would say formative assessment cares about the process more than the result. And that's a key way of thinking about it. First of all, we made the sentence a reasonable length. But more importantly, it shows why formative assessment matters. It's not that the result doesn't matter, but if we worry about the process, the result will take care of itself, right? Athletes use this all the time. If we train well, we'll perform well. And I think that as musicians and as music educators, that's something that we can really get behind. When rehearsal and practice and all of that stuff goes really well, the concert's probably going to sound good too. And formative assessment is about making sure that process goes well. It's not about grading kids or making sure that every student is meeting some arbitrary standard. It's about making sure the learning process is going well. And I think that goes such a long way towards what we do as music educators. With that in mind, let's get in a little bit more in the weeds with what formative assessment is and can be. If formative assessment is focused on the process rather than the result, what benefits does that have for us as teachers? Well, first of all, it allows you to modify your teaching to make sure that you are meeting students' needs. If we're evaluating the learning process rather than the result at the end of the learning process, we can change course if we need to. We can make sure that things are working better. We can find ways to make sure that the next lesson plan is better than the lesson plan we just worked on. So that ability to be flexible and to modify things as necessary in service of the student is one of the biggest benefits of formative assessment. Formative assessment also creates ways for you to give students immediate feedback on their performance, because we're not trying to judge against some special day or take a snapshot in time. You can go make sure that students are getting the feedback they need to improve on a daily basis, sometimes even on an hourly basis. You can make sure the progress is taking place. You get to track the learning process all the way through, from start to finish. Instead of, even when we do a pre-assessment and a post-assessment, we're only tracking the progress that was made over the entire time. We're not tracking where the progress was made, how fast it was made, when did retention happen, when did all of these other intricacies that can really help make teaching more effective. And so formative assessment is a way to kind of guarantee, in a lot of ways, that the entire learning process from start to finish is something that's productive for you and your kids. It also builds a learning culture where students can self-assess. Kids get nervous about assessment all the time, right? Kids get anxious about tests. And so when we make assessment something that's not scary, when we take this and make it about the process, not the result, students get accustomed to it. Students are able to say, you know what? It's just another evaluation. It's just another assessment. We don't even have to call them assessments or evaluations for that matter. We can go about this in a way that makes students feel comfortable, and that shows students that we have their best interests at heart, that we're making sure that they're able to get what they need. In the chat, let me know if you think that you are already using formative assessment. So it's looking like, based on the responses in the chat, that most of you do already use formative assessment. And I would agree. I think that most of you already use it in your classroom. I think that one of the ways you're doing that is on the podium. So this is a friend of mine, Matt. And this says it all about formative assessment for me. He's giving feedback to a student about that student's performance, and he's not even talking to them, right? Great gestures from the podium are all about that formative assessment, that ability to give feedback to kids, the ability to adjust their performance, show them what they need. Conductors do this all the time. He's literally giving them formative assessment as they play, right? This isn't even something that we had to set aside rehearsal time for. This is something that just happens naturally as part of a rehearsal. And so that ability to give formative assessment and make it something that's baked into your teaching in that way is something you're probably already doing. Think about this from the perspective of an administrator. Administrators can watch a student's math homework scores go up over time. But how is an administrator supposed to track the fact that as a result of this feedback, the trombone player that probably wasn't paying attention is now playing with phrasing and dynamics? Because I imagine that's probably what Matt is trying to get this trombone player to do in the back, right? He's kind of looking towards the back. He's like, no, this is where we grow. This is the climax of the piece. And so how is an administrator supposed to track that progress? It's happening, right? A formative assessment is taking place here, and that feedback is being given to students, and students are probably even acting on it. But unfortunately, that's not something that we always show. It's not something that rehearsal is centered around. Here's another example. We can actually give feedback to more than one student at once, which is something that a lot of teachers actually struggle with. In this case, right, we have a conductor that's still giving instruction to the orchestra with his pattern while simultaneously providing feedback on a performance to someone sitting in a totally different part of the ensemble. And this is formative assessment, right? Like, in fact, it's formative assessment that's being given without disrupting the flow of class at all. And that's something that, again, music teachers don't always make clear when we're being evaluated. I'm confident that everyone here has probably conducted in a way that looks like this. This is standard practice. These guys aren't doing something that's somehow magical or so outside the box that this is a groundbreaking new conducting technique. This is pretty regular stuff. We provide feedback to students in other ways too. We cut off an ensemble and we say, try that again, but with ... or try it this way, right? That's all formative assessment. We've used our ears as musicians. As an educator, we've decided, hey, these students need my feedback so that they can make an appropriate adjustment. It's a class assessment, and that back and forth, that communication is ultimately what makes up that assessment of the learning process that makes something formative. You can also do this with games, right? Something that's helps show you what's easy or what's hard for a student, and something that shows you where the ensemble needs to spend more time. If we do a warm-up and balance and blend is off, then hey, I know it's not on the lesson plan, but maybe it's time to do a balance and blend exercise instead of working on the concert rep. And that's formative assessment. You're adjusting your learning plan to make sure that students are getting what they need. At its best, we're getting students to listen to each other, right? How many of you have done an exercise that's all about getting students to listen to each other across the ensemble, right? And so when we're starting to do that, when we're getting kids to listen across the ensemble, then what we can do is have them start assessing each other. And all of that feedback, all of that progress is something that teachers do all the time, almost without thinking about. A couple of you mentioned in the chat that you use summative assessments. If you're willing, chat again. Share with us why you use summative assessments in your classroom. Yes, exactly. I think concerts are a great example. You took the words right out of my mouth. I took them out of like 2 slides from now, actually. Summative assessments are great for providing administrators with data, right? Because we're not tracking this conducting stuff. encourages more individual practice. Oh, this is perfect. Okay, because we're going to talk about how we can use formative assessments to do that later on. I think a lot of music teachers fall back on summative assessments. So many assessments, especially in an ensemble setting, don't look substantially different than summative assessments looked 100 years ago, where there was a teacher and a piano, and then student performs. And if the student performs to the teacher's satisfaction on that day, in that moment in time, they pass, right? And that's continued. It's almost like it's baked into our culture now, right? That our grades are all about the concert. We evaluate students based on chair tests. We bring students in or sections in to do a pass-off on their concert music. We all care about festival scores, right? I want straight ones. That stuff is all a snapshot in time. It's not designed to carry through the whole learning process. It's a judgment at the end of that process. I mean, hopefully we're done with that process by the time we get to contest, right? So those things that we fall back on to track student progress ultimately don't follow the formative model, even though we know how important formative assessment is as music teachers because we do it all the time. And so at best, we do things like participation grades or playing tests on a semi-regular basis to kind of show that change over time. We fall back on the summative stuff so often, and concerts, again, are another great example. When this is all we do to show not just administrators, parents, and the students themselves, how far they've come, we get an artificial example of what exactly the learning process has done. We're not tracking it all the way through. Why do we use summative assessments? Well, as I mentioned, and oftentimes it's habit, right? These are tried and true methods. This is what music teachers have been doing for a long time. This is something that is comfortable. It's easy. In a lot of cases, they're less work, right? Summative assessments aren't hard because chair tests don't always take very long, right? We have kids come play, we grade them, we judge them, we put them in order, we move on. Concerts are an important part of life in a music classroom, right? Performances matter, whether you're doing it because the National Core Art Standard says that you should, or because, darn it, band concerts are just what we do. They're built in, and that's therefore there's no need to add extra assessments when we have these summative ones ready to go. I talked a lot about how we do formative assessments in rehearsal, right? If that stuff is already taking place on the podium, sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a need for more. There's no reason to continue down that path when it's something that we're already doing. And then we fall back on the summative stuff just because we think we've already got the formative stuff covered. It's worth going back and identifying the fact that, and recognizing the fact that those formative assessments aren't necessarily being tracked or written down when they happen in rehearsal. And then finally, I think that the thing that all music teachers identify with, rehearsal time's precious. There's never enough class time. There are never enough hours in the day, especially when the concert's on the horizon. And anything you can do as a teacher to hopefully get every last possible productive minute out of that is huge. And being able to say, I'm covered, I don't need to spend more time on this, opens up your options. How could more formative assessments make things easier for you? Well, some of that involves just gathering more data. We talked about how rehearsal time is precious, but if there was a way to distill some of that data out that from the formative assessments you're already doing, then you're going to be able to show parents, students, administrators, all that stuff. You're going to be able to show them what matters. So having access to that data goes a long way, and formative assessments are how we gather data about the learning process, right? That's the definition of formative. We can encourage student practice. This almost sounds counterintuitive because students are so used to having to practice as a chore because, darn it, the playing test is coming, and I better be ready for that summative assessment, right? Formative assessment can help us differentiate instruction. Not every student needs to practice the same thing. Not every student needs to work on the same skill. But if all we're doing is taking a snapshot at the end, we don't know about that until the end of the process. Students can take a pretest. We can evaluate the pretest and say, yep, sounds like the class really needs to work on intonation for this 6-week period. Get to the end and realize, well, actually, the trombones needed to work on articulation. And I'm picking on trombone players because I am one. So being able to notice that partway through the process and adjust, even down to the individual student, potentially, goes a long way. And along with that, it's about getting kids the feedback they need to succeed. That said, formative assessment can be difficult. Formative assessment isn't necessarily something that's easy to do. It means you have to collect a lot of student data. That means that you have to go out of your way to gather that data and make sure that it's ready to go. It requires that dedication to consistency, because you're only going to get a lot of data if you measure regularly. We already talked about how there's never enough hours in the day, and now we're talking about modifying lesson plans, differentiating instruction, right? Going to those lengths, doing all of that stuff is extra time that you may not feel like you have ready, or that you may not feel like you have access to. And as I mentioned earlier, kids can get anxious about so many tests. It can be difficult to build a culture where having those assessments be formative and regular and consistent makes a difference. The good news is that technology can help. When we're talking about collecting a lot of data, I mean, it's the 21st century. That's what technology is good at these days. Think about how much data technology collects from your phone every day, or maybe don't think about that if it's too stressful. So collecting and managing large amounts of data is something that technology is great for. Dedication to consistent measurement often means we need to measure lots of different things, and technology can help provide you access to musical content, right? It opens a larger world to students. Those students then get access to, the assessments don't become boring because they have access to different tools and different content. You can adjust more efficiently with technology. You can make those changes more smoothly when you do need to modify lesson plans, differentiate instruction, etc. With access to technology, we're not starting from scratch. Finally, kids that get anxious about so many tests, technology can help give kids feedback when you can't, right? So, for example, when they're at home. And so when it's not a teacher sitting there judging them, grading them, assessing them, that can remove some of the anxiety, right? Technology can help be a placeholder until you can give them more feedback. So we're going to look at 3 very specific things that you can do to boost your formative assessments in the classroom. Rubrics, teaching kids to practice self-assessment, and how you can build a culture of home practice, how you can set an expectation and encourage kids to practice at home using some formative assessment tools. And we're going to look at how you can do those things within SmartMusic. First one of those, rubrics. Rubrics are by far the most common formative assessment. And they're so effective because they provide clarity for students. They allow you to weight particular aspects of student performance. So one way to do this is to base it on standards, right? You can pluck state standards that you're focusing on and put them directly into the rubric so that students not only know what they're doing, but you can justify and explain why these things are important, again, to parents and administrators. Rubrics can give you feedback about your teaching. When you're evaluating students against this consistent set of criteria, you're able to notice, oh, wow, I didn't expect everyone to struggle there. And so you're able to then go back and forth and say, no, this is the place where things struggled, or this is the place where the teaching went really well. I need to remember to do that exercise again, because assigning that one in the method book got us where we needed to be on dotted rhythms, for example. And so looking at all of these things together, right, consistent measurement, providing clarity for students, weighting particular aspects of the performance, all that put together means that the rubrics are a very powerful tool, and there's a reason that they're such a common form of formative assessment. 2 major types of rubrics that I suspect many of you have heard of, analytic versus holistic. So analytic rubrics break up criteria and score them separately. This is the classic grid rubric that we pretty much all seen and used. And in holistic rubrics, all the criteria are evaluated together. There are pros and cons to both. In analytic rubrics, one of the pros is, again, you get better feedback about your teaching. You get to be more specific. You get to say, okay, articulation was this important, phrasing, dynamics, this important, notes and rhythms, this important, because they're broken up into different spots on the rubric. The downside is they take longer to grade. So that time factor tends to play a bigger role when you're using analytic rubrics. I tend to think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but holistic rubrics certainly have a place too. Evaluating the criteria altogether means that you get to evaluate the performance as a complete whole, right? An audience doesn't sit there and think about, well, the articulation was great, but the dynamics weren't really there. So a holistic rubric, especially in a music performance setting, can go a long way. Sometimes it can then lead to inconsistency in grading, right? We're lumping a lot of stuff together, so criteria might be less clear. But at the same time, that criteria being all grouped can make it faster to grade, can make it clear for the students that this is being evaluated as a complete performance. So both these rubrics are great forms of formative assessment that I'd encourage everyone to try using. Some of this is about trial and error. If you find an analytic rubric that's working, that's actually giving you the information you need, and then giving the students the information they need, keep using it. I think we get into analysis paralysis sometimes, and being able to say that, no, this is the rubric that's going well, and leaning on it goes a long way. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how rubrics work in SmartMusic. So here I've got SmartMusic open, and I'm assigning John Mackey's Foundry to a class. I've already decided I want them to play the whole piece. I've already got all those parameters set up. And so this is the point at which we create rubrics. This is built into the assignment creation process in SmartMusic. So you can see a list of criteria over here. Mine are a little sloppy, since this is my actual SmartMusic account. But let's take a look at first this assessment grade. You'll know it's the assessment grade in SmartMusic because it's got the little orange flag. And so this is the notes and rhythms. This is the red notes and green notes that SmartMusic will evaluate for you. So we can add that to the rubric. We'll see that we can give it a weight. We'll weight it later. In the meantime, let's start by building a rubric item that looks more analytic. So we can build a new rubric item. And let's say that for this example, we really care about dynamics. So we'll title it Dynamics. And then what we'll do is we'll click Multiple. And so what this does is it lets us assign multiple levels very clearly to the dynamic evaluation. So, for example, we'll say that this is level 1. If you're only get a 1 out of 4 in dynamics, we're only going to give you 25% of the total points. So fill that out here, and then we can do whatever we want in this description, right? This is a great place to cut and paste state standards. You know, if we're talking about musical expression and interpretation, we could actually put a state standard in here to show this is what we're focusing on with this evaluation of the student. In this case, we'll say everything was the same volume. And then we'll add another level, call this one level 2, make it worth 50% of the points. And we'll say most things were the same volume. For time's sake, I'm making these descriptions pretty simple, but again, I encourage you to make the description something that's useful for you. If this is about state standards, make this about state standards. Go find the words and put them in there. If this is about making sure that we cover something that an adjudicator mentioned at our last festival, put that in there. Remind yourself as you evaluate the students what matters to you. So we'll quickly fill out these last 2 levels. Once we're done with all that, we'll click Save Criterion. It'll appear over here under Dynamics, and we can add it to our rubric. You can see the 4 little dots. just SmartMusic's way of reminding us that, oh yeah, that has 4 levels to it. You can see over here in my various options, I have some that are 2, some that are 5. So that's something that's customizable and is up to you. I think my diction one simply says you saying all vowels or you saying no vowels. That's why it has 2. So lots of options. And for this one, let's say we really want the kids to focus on dynamics. So we'll make that an equal number of points to the assessment grade. Maybe this is only a 10-point assignment, right? So I could give them each 5 points. SmartMusic will make all the calculations. And again, there's 4 levels. So if I give a kid level 2 out of 4, they'll get 50% of these points, 2.5. You can also use this to build a rubric that is more holistic. I can remove these criteria, build another new one, make it a single item, and then make this title and description one holistic evaluation of the student's performance. And that's certainly an option as well. So maybe this is the final assessment before we get before it's concert time. And so I could say perform entire piece with musical accuracy, and so all of that kind of stuff. Though it does have a limit on the number of characters in the field. So however you want to do that, you'll do the same thing. You'll save the criteria, and then you can add it to the rubric. So for this one, we'll go back to the dynamics and the assessment grade, and we'll make them both worth 50 points. Also mentioned that rubrics are a great way to help differentiate instruction, and that's something else that can happen in SmartMusic. So I can assign this to a class. I'll assign it to this class. And what I can do is I could theoretically assign it to some students, right? I could give this assignment to just one student as a way to make sure that this assessment is best suited to track that student's progress. One student at a time can get a little laborious, but maybe it's time to make sure that this time the flutes are in tune and they need an extra exercise to work on that. And that's something that you could assign to just the flutes, something that you could assign to just the trombones as you go. And so this is another way to differentiate that instruction and make sure that every student's getting what they need. And you can do that with the rubric. So rubrics are the formative assessment you already do, and now you can start tracking it. Students and teachers can both get feedback with the rubrics in SmartMusic. Now we're doing formative assessment, and there's a record of progress now when a student submits a SmartMusic assignment that both you and the student can review, right? This is something that you can do as many times as you need to create that record of progress. So we're using technology to gather more data, keep track of it, put it in order, make sure it's something we can access and share with parents and administrators. All of that stuff that we were talking about maybe being a struggle with formative assessment is now something that's easily attainable because of the technology. It's also worth noting that the criteria that I showed you in SmartMusic are saved, and they're saved with your account. So you can use those criteria with any class, on any assignment, different school years. If you change schools, keep a SmartMusic account, and you can continue using those same rubric criteria. So one of the things, I was recently doing a SmartMusic training at a local school here in Colorado, and they were building rubrics that exactly matched the way that their district was handling state standards. And they were all able to have these consistent rubrics. So there was even a vertical alignment with their rubrics. The middle schoolers that were doing SmartMusic assignments were going to be able to have the exact same rubric, exact same evaluation for the formative assessments that they would then do at the high school. And so there's all of these extra bonuses to being able to track student progress in this way. We also talked about self-assessment. This is something that I've become more and more passionate about recently. Rubrics are great. Rubrics are a formative assessment that we've all heard of, that is easy to get comfortable with. And self-assessment is all about teaching a student to fish instead of giving the student a fish. So showing students how to evaluate their own performance, showing students why their performance turned out a certain way, not only teaches ear training, critical thinking, all of this extra stuff besides just the concert music, but can also be a conduit for making sure that students get formative assessment from themselves and each other. We talked about not having enough time. When students are handling some of the formative assessment on their own, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes something that happens almost by default in your ensemble. So I like to start self-assessment work with peer assessment in class, right? So a great way to start is to say half the class is going to play something, the other half is going to assess. And I encourage you not to break it up, like violins and cellos or brass and woodwinds. Break it up other ways. Have kids number off. Have kids count off so that they can really listen to their stand partner. Have kids number off so that it still sounds like a full arrangement when they play, and that students can evaluate something holistically, hearing every part. So don't feel like there's one right way to divvy up the class. Half the class is going to play, half the class is going to assess, then switch. You can have kids offer each other feedback between the performances or at the end. Kind of depends on where you think their attention span is at, how classroom management is going that day. And a big thing there is for you as the educator to model feedback for students by asking questions. What went well in that performance? What really made a musical impact? What was the best moment? Help kids support each other by asking the leading question. Get them thinking about the music in a context that is assessing their peers. Because if a student's assessing their peer that way, they're going to start to think about their own performance in that context as well. The next step in that is called the fishbowl. This is the teaching a student to fish thing again. You can pull up SmartMusic in class, right, and have a student play along with the reference recording. And when a student's playing along with the reference recording, their peers are now going to get to evaluate the student's performance in the context of something that sounds really great. So they're getting reinforcement about what their own playing should and could sound like at the same time that they're learning to assess music in the context of a peer's performance. So the ability to kind of do both of those things at once is wonderful. It's called the fishbowl because in small groups or sectionals, the student might actually sit in the middle of a circle of peers. That's not a requirement by any means. And I think a key step of the fishbowl exercise is having the student offer feedback on their own performance. And you can frame that in a way where students are offered a bunch of feedback from peers, and then you say, who did you agree with? And some kid will say, well, all of it. But question, well, did you really think that your dynamics were the place where you had the most trouble? Or did you think that it was articulations? Did you feel like measure 4 was the problem? Because I thought measure 4 sounded really good. So there are ways to make this about a conversation. It doesn't have to take the whole class. This can be something that we rotate through too. It's a way to track student progress incrementally, which again is the kind of learning process evaluation that makes formative assessment so effective. Some more options with reference recordings. You can go back to peers and have kids partner up and listen to reference recordings. You can do this with the whole band or whole ensemble. Perform a passage, listen to the reference recording. And getting access to those great recordings from SmartMusic is a way to have access to them all at your fingertips. And it's a way to have access to them with visual reminders. So because I can pull up the reference recording with anyone's part on screen, one option is to say, okay, here's the place where the clarinets have the melody, but it's piano. So we're all going to sit there and listen to the clarinets play with SmartMusic. And if you can't hear the clarinets, you're playing too loud, right? And so there's a way to evaluate peer performance, leading to the self-assessment thing, in the context of these reference recordings, and to find areas for improvement on their own. So you can see how this is kind of scaffolded, right? We're starting with half the class plays, half the class listens, then we're going to listen to an individual's performance. Now we're going to start as a group finding places for improvement. And this can all happen in the context of one rehearsal or over an entire concert cycle. So there are ways to build these formative assessments into rehearsal as well. And these are things that are easier to track. They're easier to show. Eventually, you could even experiment with students creating their own rubrics. This is adventurous, admittedly, right? Asking students to evaluate themselves that way. But you'd be surprised how motivated kids get once they have ownership of that process. If they're the ones finding things to work on in rehearsal, then it makes sense that they would be the ones that would want to evaluate when it's improved. And giving them that ownership can be a really powerful tool to help students make sure that things are on track. It motivates them, and it also just gets them practicing. Another option, and this is kind of how we track some of the self-assessment that takes place in the classroom, exit slips, right? These can be single questions. What was the most important thing you learned today, right? It could be anything, anything from a new fingering to that breed was moldy, right? So there are all sorts of options. These are more conceptual. These are a little less related to the music. But one way to use the exit slip to track that learning process is to say, okay, today we did some of this peer assessment. What was the most useful part? What did you learn? Get them thinking, reinforce the fact that this assessment, which wasn't a test, right? It wasn't for a, quote, grade. But now there's an exit slip with student thoughts on it. We have demonstrable proof that students are evaluating their own performance and evaluating it accurately. We're building ear training skills. We're getting kids passionate about playing music, and we're making it less about the concert and more about the process. Some other benefits to teaching self-assessment. Kids will panic over one wrong note. They're going to learn to evaluate the whole performance. They're going to have a more holistic approach. And being able to easily move on from one wrong note because they know that this is a whole performance is something that comes with that self-assessment. Sure, if the whole point of this was to play exactly all the right notes and rhythms and they play some wrong notes, self-evaluation is going to be a little harsher. But if the goal was to play with beautiful phrases and we miss one accidental, that's something we can reinforce, right? This is a way to teach music instead of being so preoccupied with the notes and rhythms. And it's a way to empower students to do that on their own with the self-assessment. Students also won't learn wrong notes and rhythms and have to unlearn them. If they're consistently evaluating themselves, if they're consistently going back and looking at the red and green notes SmartMusic provides, if they're consistently listening to what they record for themselves in SmartMusic, then they're able to fix those issues before they come in to your rehearsal space. And that is one of the most frustrating things, right? When a student comes in and has practiced that wrong rhythm to death, because it's so much harder to teach the right rhythm once that's stuck in their head, right? These self-assessments also are a huge factor in dealing with assessment testing anxiety. When we just evaluate our playing all the time, it's not some big thing. The motivation to practice now is going to stop being about, oh crap, I have a playing test, and it's going to start being about, oh yeah, we agreed we needed to work on that, and I said it on my exit slip. So we're changing that culture with self-assessment. The third way to drive formative assessment is to build that culture of home practice. Self-assessment rubrics can totally be the tools to get kids practicing at home. Practice logs aren't very effective as assessments, right? There's no way to monitor how effective the practice was. Let's assume that everything goes exactly according to plan with a practice log, right? Whether you do it online or whether you do it with slips of paper still, kid says I practiced for X minutes, gets a parent signature, and comes back. Let's even say that it really is Magical Christmas Land and the student sounds better after they practice for this many minutes. You still don't know what happened. There's still no way to track that, right? This is a key piece of the learning process that you weren't able to keep tabs on. You don't know why that day's practice was effective when last week's wasn't. You don't know why this practice was effective for one student but not another. And using SmartMusic analytics instead of a traditional practice log can help with that, because you'll be able to take care of all that minute stuff automatically. In real time, student data is uploaded and accessible, so you can see, oh, this student spent this much time exploring content that I didn't assign them, and this much time working on the assignment. And you know that down to the second. So when a student comes in and sounds better, you'll be able to say, oh no, that's why. Again, this is another way that technology is dealing with data collection, right? Collecting practice log data is a pain, even if you're doing it online through an LMS. And having all of that close at hand with SmartMusic goes a long way. And that's all coming along with the pitch and rhythm feedback from Red Notes and Green Notes that SmartMusic provides as well. So some examples here. Here's what the analytics screen looks like in SmartMusic. And so you can see that the bars are differentiated by color, so you can see what was on assignments and what was exploration. You can select date ranges, and you can even pull it up down to the individual student, and you can separate it out by class. You can also see which content was opened over those dates. So you can see that, in this case, the student opened a piece of concert music twice, and they opened 2 different exercises in Accent on Achievement. So the ability to say, oh no, okay, they worked on the stuff I assigned, and how many times it was opened is another way to keep track of that student progress without needing to micromanage the practice log. So to bring it all home, we talked about how self-assessment and rubrics can power home practice. Self-assessment can build an expectation about the way that the student practices. All that stuff about choosing a goal, evaluating their own performance, not freaking out about one missed accidental, thinking about a larger plan, all of those things now can happen at home. Those reference recordings that you used as a demonstration tool in class, students have access to in SmartMusic when they go home to practice. Students can listen to recordings of their own performance. And when students submit an assignment to you in SmartMusic, they can comment on their own submission. In fact, one option is to require that students fill this out, right? You can say, if you want full credit, comment on your submission. Tell me how you think you did. So the self-assessment has now come full circle. We've gone from playing in class, offering each other feedback, all the way to submitting an assignment, practicing something at home, and performing that same self-assessment, saying, I thought this went really well. I got that one red note. I don't know, I thought it was pretty close. Maybe I was just out of tune. And that now we've completed the loop. We're now communicating back and forth with students as best we possibly can. We're encouraging them to apply what they've learned in class. Outside of class, we're doing the whole flipped classroom thing. Right? Now we're a well-oiled machine. Rubrics help make expectations clear. And if students write it on their own, they take that full ownership of the learning process. We talked about how rubrics can be easily integrated with SmartMusic assignments instead of depending on that practice log. Instead of only worrying about how many minutes a student practiced, students are now in control of the practice process. And I mean that in a good way, right? Not that the natives will get restless, but that students are evaluating their own performance. They're setting goals, focusing on the quality of the process, and we have an entire formative assessment loop. They're going to assess it. They're going to send you feedback. You're going to send them feedback when you grade the assignment in SmartMusic, and then we're going to set a new goal, potentially together, right? And we can do this with exercises to create a clear curriculum flow, or we can do it with concert rep, whether by breaking it up into sections of the piece or by first focusing on notes and rhythms and then adding musicality later. So there's all sorts of options here with how to leverage that self-assessment and the rubrics to build that culture of home practice. Again, practicing at home doesn't have to only happen before a summative assessment, right? It can happen when students are practicing because they're self-assessing, because that's just the expected path to practice. With my last few minutes, I'm going to talk about getting started with SmartMusic in case any of you have any questions, and then I'll answer any questions that have come up in the chat. I noticed several of you commenting about some of the options in SmartMusic, so I want to make sure we talk about some of those. Educator access to SmartMusic is $40 for a calendar year. You'll get access to the entire repertoire library, includes more than 90 method books. You'll get access to the new built-in notation tool. that lets you import music XMLs, edit them, and assign them to students. If you have a favorite warm-up and you've got a finale file, go nuts. You can put it in SmartMusic. Access to all of those reference recordings in class also comes with the $40 a year option. Student access, so that they can get access to the assignments and assessments you give them at home, then comes in 3 flavors. The basic level includes the method books and content you upload. Solo titles, ensemble titles, concert repertoire comes at the $8 level. And then at $12 per student, they'll have access to the entire library, whether you've assigned it or not, so that they can explore the things that they're passionate about and start to assess their own performance on things you haven't even assigned. There's no minimum number of students, and we can work with you to develop a personalized quote to make sure that things are look the way that you need for your classroom. If you haven't tried SmartMusic yet, we are currently running an amazing giveaway. We are giving 20 teachers a Chromebook, and all you have to do is try SmartMusic. Sign up for the free trial. So go to this URL. I will put it in the chat as well here once we're finished with the slides. So start the free trial in the next 2 weeks, and you'll be entered for a chance to win one of those 20 Chromebooks. When you get to the URL, this is what it will look like. That way you'll know you're in the right place. Okay, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to check the chat for questions, and we'll do this thing. So Andrew asked, how do you measure each individual with the same integrity in a live performance, in a musical performance? How is this objective when it's an artistic performance, right? When it's a subjective thing? How can you ensure that student A is evaluated the same as student B? I would say, while some admins may be more receptive than others, that is the goal of rubrics. So if a rubric isn't getting that job done in the view of an admin, talk to the admin about how we can improve the rubric. It may be that explicitly including some state standards on the rubric and providing really clear analytic criteria on the rubric goes a long way. Katie's all over it, thinking about ways to improve the rubrics. I love it. In terms of tracking and recording formative assessments, I found that when we track those formative assessments, it not only guides the instruction, but also makes it easier to track student progress. So guiding the instruction is one thing, and I think that's where formative assessment really shines. But having that extra data can be a great reminder for you. It can provide you with a way to adjust your teaching. But it can also go back to that bit with the admin where you're saying, oh, okay, well, no, we made this progress here. And so tracking formative assessments doesn't necessarily get in the way, or hopefully it shouldn't get in the way of helping you adjust your teaching. How do you grade a holistic rubric without mentally checking the specific criteria? In a perfect world, you would always mentally check all of the specific criteria when you grade a holistic rubric. It's easy to skim, right? Especially when you've got a holistic rubric for exercise 47, right? In your method book, it's easy to blow through it. It's also one of those things where if someone else is grading exercise 48, then the person who graded exercise 47, maybe the holistic rubric isn't interpreted exactly the same way. That's where an analytic rubric really shines. But probably for exercise 47, it's not that big a deal. That's a place where the analytic rubric might just be overkill. Love the idea of recording only a handful of kids at a time. Again, that's a place where SmartMusic can do a lot of heavy lifting. Students can record one at a time to make sure that everyone's meeting those objectives that you have for the recording intro. Giving a grade based on a rubric, when does it become summative assessment? This is a great question. So there's 2 ways to go about that. You can give students feedback, but not to give a grade. That's one way to make sure it stays formative. Formative assessment doesn't necessarily mean the student doesn't get a grade. It means that we're evaluating the process rather than taking a snapshot of the result. So one way to keep things formative but also give students a grade is to very quickly retest them. So if we're tracking the learning process, maybe this is a matter of turning something in on Monday and turning something in on Friday. It's not a pre-test and a post-test for an entire unit of instruction, but it's a way to make sure that we tracked something. Okay, learning process went well this week. And then they get a grade only based on what they turned in on Friday. So Katie says, parents, staff, and community are always impressed by student growth, but I wouldn't be able to prove it unless they came to class. This is a great example of building that culture of home practice, right? Parents and community now get to see ways that students are practicing and self-assessing. This is a way to connect all the dots for them by connecting the self-assessments that they're doing in class with the self-assessments that they're going to start doing at home. Lee has a great tip. If you want to make sure your rubric is doing well, have another teacher use it. If another teacher can give a student the same grade or the same evaluation that you gave with your rubric, then the rubric's pretty objective at that point. That's a great litmus test for it. Janice. So the way that students access SmartMusic at home, you can go to smartmusic.com/pricing to get more info on that. That's the various tiers of student access. So once you have a teacher subscription, we can get students involved at the $4, $8, or $12 level. Darius, you are absolutely able to upload material that you've chosen to use. SmartMusic will let you upload any music XML file, whether that was created in Finale, MuseScore, NoteFlight, Sibelius, Dorigo, Notion, all that stuff. So any music XML file can get uploaded to SmartMusic. Are there any other questions that folks have? We've gone a little bit over. I'm going to share my screen one more time and show you how to stay in touch with us. If you want to access this webinar again, we're going to upload it to our YouTube channel. In fact, we're going to add it to this giant list of all of our SmartMusic webinars. So if you're interested in more webinars that you may have missed earlier this school year, you can visit our YouTube channel. We've got a whole big playlist. Darius was asking about uploading content. That was one of the ones that we recently did. So all that information is up there on YouTube for you. And be sure to stay in touch. Say hi to us on social media, and on Facebook, join the Teaching with SmartMusic Facebook group if you're teaching with SmartMusic or thinking about getting started. Thank you all so much. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions.